Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sun Moon Audiobook, the channel where we share wisdom and inspiring book journeys to help you grow and develop your best self, inside and out. Sometimes, we live as if reason were a steady light guiding every step we take, and then something small, invisible, flickers inside us and makes us turn left when logic would say right. Imagine walking through a marketplace filled with colors, scents, and voices. Every price tag you see, every offer that seems too good to resist, every choice you make, they're not as rational as you think. They are whispers of hidden forces, patterns in our minds, small, predictable irrationalities that quietly shape our world. Dan Ariely, the author behind Predictably Irrational, is not merely an economist. He's a curious scientist of human nature, a man who, after suffering severe burns and a long recovery, began to wonder why people do what they do when logic fails. His warmth and humor disarm the reader. His experiments illuminate how emotions, social norms, and invisible expectations rule over our so-called rational selves. And through his work, he shows us not only how flawed we are, but how beautifully human that flaw can be. He begins by showing us the illusion of relativity. Picture yourself walking into a cafe, deciding between a small, medium, and large latte. You think you're making a free choice, but the truth is, your mind is comparing, not deciding. You see the medium as just right not because it truly is, but because it exists in contrast to the large one. Every day we're trapped in comparisons. Salaries, cars, partners, lifestyles. We don't measure value in absolute terms. We measure it in relation to something else nearby. Ariely explains that relativity is a trickster. It makes us believe we're choosing wisely, when in fact, we're comparing poorly. He tells the story of a subscription offer from The Economist magazine, 3 options: online only, print only, and a combination of both for the same price as print. The print-only option seems pointless, right? Yet it acts as a decoy, pushing readers toward the more expensive combined offer. That decoy doesn't exist for our benefit. It exists to manipulate our perception. We are predictable in our irrationality. We fall for the same patterns every time. And Ariely doesn't judge us. He invites us to look closer. Because when we understand how our minds play these games, we gain back a little freedom. The mantra he returns to, one we must remember, is this: we are not as rational as we think, but we can learn to predict and understand our irrationality. Then he takes us into the seductive world of the word free. There's something about zero that overwhelms logic. In one experiment, people chose a free Hershey's Kiss over a discounted Lindt truffle, even though the truffle was the far better deal. When the price hits zero, our brains light up with irrational excitement. Free feels magical, but nothing is truly free. Even when the cost disappears, there's still a trade attention, time, emotion, or opportunity. Think about it. How many times have we clicked free trial only to end up subscribing for months? How often have we attended a free event that cost us a night of rest or peace of mind? Ariely reveals that the allure of free is not economic. It's emotional. It makes us feel like we're escaping loss, that we're winning something for nothing. But that sense of gain is an illusion. His gentle advice: whenever you feel the pull of free, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really paying here? He moves deeper into another fascinating corner of our minds: the cost of social versus market norms. Humans live in 2 worlds, one of social exchange and one of market exchange. In the social world, we help a friend move. We bake cookies for a neighbor. We comfort someone without expecting return. In the market world, we pay for services, negotiate salaries, assign value in dollars. Problems arise when we mix them. Ariely's experiments showed that when you pay someone even a small amount for a task that was previously done as a favor, it changes everything. Social warmth disappears. Market logic replaces generosity. And once that shift happens, it's hard to go back. A mother who offers her child a few cents for each hug will soon notice the hug stop being sincere. This duality lives in all of us. Companies, too, struggle with it. They want loyalty a social norm, yet they pay for performance a market norm. The lesson is profound. Relationships thrive on meaning, not just money. You, who are listening right now, might feel that tension at work or in love, the thin line between giving freely and expecting reward. Ariely reminds us to choose our frame consciously. Then comes one of the most haunting truths in behavioral science, the power of expectations. In an experiment, people who drank beer with a few drops of vinegar claimed it tasted fine unless they were told about the vinegar beforehand. When they expected something bad, their experience changed. What we anticipate shapes what we feel. Even pain is influenced by it. Placebos work not because they cure, but because they align with our faith in healing. Ariely shows how brands, price tags, and prestige operate like placebos for everyday life. A 100 wine tastes better because we expect it to. A luxury label can make us feel confident, even when the product is identical to a cheaper one. Expectations mold reality. And yet, this can be our power, too. When we learn to set our expectations with awareness, when we decide to expect meaning, kindness, or possibility, our experience shifts toward them. There's another layer of irrationality that goes even deeper: procrastination and self-control. We make promises to our future selves and break them again and again. Ariely's students, given the freedom to set their own deadlines, often failed to deliver unless they imposed clear constraints. Freedom without structure becomes chaos. The human mind craves boundaries. It rebels against infinite choice. This is where Ariely's gentle wisdom meets our modern lives. He shows that discipline is not punishment, it's design. The most successful among us don't have perfect willpower. They have systems that make good choices easy and bad choices hard. Automatic savings, gym appointments, phone-free zones, these are the ropes we throw to our future selves. And it's not weakness to need them, it's wisdom. Somewhere here, the story turns personal. I remember a time I kept telling myself I'd start writing tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Days became weeks, and the guilt grew heavy. Then I set one small rule: write for 10 minutes after breakfast, no matter how messy. That structure, small as it was, saved me from my own illusions of control. Ariely was right, we don't rise to the level of our intentions. We fall to the level of our systems. Halfway through, Ariely asks us to look at honesty, our moral compass, and how flexible it can be. He ran experiments where participants could cheat for money. Most people did just a little. Hardly anyone took everything they could. We bend the truth, but not enough to see ourselves as bad people. It's the story we tell ourselves that keeps us honest enough. He found that when people were reminded of moral codes like the 10 Commandments or even honor pledges, their cheating dropped to zero. Not because they feared punishment, but because morality re-entered the frame of their awareness. The lesson is timeless. When we remember our values, we behave better. When we forget them, we drift. The danger isn't great evil. It's small dishonesty multiplied by millions of moments. So, Ariely continues peeling back the layers of our fragile reasoning, showing us how easily emotions, expectations, and tiny contexts shift our sense of what's right, what's fair, and what's true. After exploring honesty, he takes us into the mysterious realm of ownership, that peculiar attachment that makes something more valuable simply because it's ours. He calls it the endowment effect. Imagine this: two people in a university experiment. One is given a mug with the school logo, the other is not. When asked to sell it, the mug owner demands far more than the other is willing to pay. Why? Because ownership changes perception. Once we possess something, an object, an idea, even a belief, we weave it into our identity. Letting go feels like losing a part of ourselves. Ariely's insight here is deep and quietly unsettling. We don't love things because they are valuable. We believe they are valuable because we love them. This is why we hold on to bad investments, cling to old clothes, defend opinions long after they've stopped serving truth. Our ego wraps around what we call mine. And until we see that, we can't be free. Think about how this plays out in relationships. We become attached not only to people, but to our stories about them. Even when a friendship fades or love changes, we fight to keep it alive because it's ours. The pain of losing something often outweighs the joy of gaining something new, a principle Ariely calls loss aversion. The human heart, it seems, is twice as sensitive to loss as it is to gain. This explains so much of our hesitation, doesn't it? Why we stay in jobs that drain us. Why we resist change even when it promises growth. We are designed to protect what we already have. Yet, Ariely's work reminds us that awareness can soften this instinct. When we recognize our attachment for what it is, a story, not a truth, we can step back, breathe, and make space for something better. From here, Ariely invites us to explore another hidden force, the illusion of demand and supply, or more precisely, how arbitrary our sense of value truly is. He introduces us to the concept of arbitrary coherence. In an experiment, people wrote down the last 2 digits of their social security numbers, then were asked to bid on bottles of wine, computer accessories, and other items. Those with higher numbers consistently bid more simply because the initial number anchored their perception of value. The message is clear. Our first impressions, the first price, the first offer, the first number create a psychological anchor that shapes every decision afterward. The market, it turns out, is not born of pure rationality, but of collective illusion. What we think is worth it is often nothing more than an echo of the first price we ever saw. It doesn't stop there. Ariely explains that our lives are full of such anchors: the first salary we earn, the first house we rent, the first love we lose. Every new choice is unconsciously compared to those initial experiences. That's why breaking old patterns feels like breaking gravity. But he doesn't leave us hopeless. He reminds us that anchors can be reset through awareness. When we consciously question our first assumptions, when we pause and say, wait, why do I think this is worth so much? We begin to reclaim our freedom of thought. Next, he turns to the strange ways we misjudge our own self-worth, especially when it comes to labor. In a fascinating experiment, people who built IKEA furniture valued it more than identical pre-assembled versions. The act of creation inflated their sense of worth. This, Ariely calls the IKEA effect. We love what we labor for. Even flawed work feels precious when it carries our effort. This insight, though charming, hides a darker truth. Sometimes we cling to bad ideas, failed projects, or broken systems simply because we made them. We mistake effort for excellence. But awareness transforms this too. When we can love our effort and still let go of what no longer works, we evolve. That's maturity, honoring the work without worshiping the outcome. Ariely's storytelling style makes even economics feel deeply human. He's not just talking about markets and money. He's talking about the soul of decision-making, the hidden threads connecting emotion and choice. He moves on to explore the problem of price and placebo. He found that when people took a more expensive painkiller, they experienced more relief than those who took a cheaper one, even though both were identical placebos. Price became a proxy for trust. Our brains, wired to equate cost with quality, changed the very chemistry of experience. We feel more healed because we believe more deeply. This is the strange alchemy of perception belief turning into biology. Ariely's point is not to shame us, but to awaken us. Once we understand that perception is powerful enough to rewrite pain, we begin to see how our thoughts shape our world in ways science is only beginning to map. There's beauty in this too. If belief can make sugar pills feel like medicine, what else can it transform? Perhaps our confidence, our love, our creativity are also placebos we can consciously choose, self-created expectations that alter what's real. Then, there's a section on how context and comparison skew fairness. In one story, Ariely talks about the impact of timing on decisions, how people's willingness to pay for an item changes depending on what they were doing just before. Our judgments are contextual, not consistent, and that has vast implications for justice, business, and even love. He dives deeper into how emotions distort our reasoning. In one of his most striking experiments, he asked male participants questions about morality and decision-making, both in a calm state and when sexually aroused. The difference was dramatic. When aroused, moral lines blurred, impulsivity soared, and logic dissolved. His conclusion: our decisions in a cold state are almost irrelevant when we face real temptation or emotion. It's a humbling realization that self-control and morality are not static traits, but fragile conditions. The person you are when calm is not the same person you are when moved by anger, fear, or desire. The key, Ariely suggests, is not to deny emotion, but to anticipate it, to set up safeguards before we reach those emotional states. Because in the heat of the moment, reason rarely wins. That's where his concept of pre-commitment shines. Whether it's setting automatic savings, installing website blockers, or giving your friend permission to hold you accountable, pre-commitment is how you protect your future self from your present weakness. It's an act of compassion toward the person you will be tomorrow. At this point in the journey, the tone of Predictably Irrational deepens not just intellectually, but spiritually. Ariely starts weaving in the moral threads behind our decisions. He shows how even tiny lies can ripple outward into collective dysfunction. The small fudging of numbers, the hidden costs we ignore, the unspoken biases all add up. Our irrationalities are personal, but their impact is shared. And yet, amid all this, he finds hope. Because irrationality is predictable. If we can predict it, we can design against it. That's what behavioral economics offers, not a way to make people perfect, but a way to make systems kinder. Imagine a world, he says, where policies are built not for the ideal rational human, but for the real, emotional, forgetful, beautifully flawed person we all are. Automatic savings plans that nudge us toward security, health programs that reward consistency over perfection, educational designs that use curiosity rather than punishment. That is the future Ariely believes in, one built with compassion for our predictably irrational selves. Right here, the narration takes a soft pause, a breath, because this is the moment where the listener, you must reflect on your own life. The choices that once felt logical but were shaped by unseen hands. The habits you've defended. The comparisons that trapped you. The free things that cost your peace. It's easy to feel a sting of guilt. But let that soften into curiosity. Because the point of this book and this conversation is to expose your flaws. It's to give you sight. Ariely whispers through his data and humor the same truth over and over. When you understand your irrationality, you reclaim your power. Awareness doesn't erase imperfection, it transforms it into wisdom. Ariely has walked us through the architecture of our irrational selves, and now he asks us to consider what this knowledge can build. If we can predict how our minds fail, we can also design lives that gently protect us from those failures. He explores one of his most famous ideas, the power of expectations and emotions in shaping reality. Remember the placebo effect? It's not only about medicine, it's about life itself. When we expect kindness, we perceive more of it. When we anticipate failure, we unconsciously invite it. Ariely discovered that emotions aren't intrusions upon reason, they are reason, disguised in a different language. Through his experiments, he found that people under emotional influence, anger, excitement, fear, consistently made choices they later regretted. But more strikingly, he found how blind we are to this change. When calm, we insist well-behave rationally. When emotional, we forget calm ever existed. It's as though we become two selves, the reflective and the reactive, forever at war within us. This duality defines so much of our behavior. It's why apologies often come too late, why promises fade after the moment passes, why willpower feels like a muscle that trembles and gives out. Ariely doesn't shame this weakness. He treats it with compassion. He reminds us that the goal isn't perfect self-control, but strategic compassion to know our limits and build gentle guardrails before we crash into them. So how can we do that? He gives clues. Automate decisions when you can. Set defaults that favor your long-term well-being. Remove temptation rather than test your willpower. Surround yourself with social norms that elevate rather than drain you. The world, after all, shapes our behavior just as much as our thoughts do. Then comes one of Ariely's most powerful explorations, the problem of self-deception and honesty. In one experiment, he had people take a test, self-grade their answers, and receive payment for each correct one. Most cheated, but only a little. They wanted the money, yes, but they also wanted to see themselves as good people. The real battle wasn't between truth and lies, it was between desire and self-image. He found that dishonesty thrives not in the shadows of immorality, but in the comfort of justification. It's just a little white lie, we say. Everyone does it. And yet, each small deception nudges the boundary outward. Society doesn't collapse because of massive frauds. It erodes through millions of tiny, self-serving exceptions. But Ariely also found hope in moral reminders. Before the same test, when participants were asked to recall the 10 Commandments or sign an honor pledge, cheating vanished. The rules themselves didn't matter. What mattered was awareness, the reawakening of moral identity. His experiment suggests something profound. Most people don't need surveillance. They need remembrance. And isn't that the quiet truth of life? We stray not because we are evil, but because we forget. We forget who we want to be, what we stand for, how fragile integrity feels in the moment of choice. From there, Ariely turns to our irrational relationship with time and money. Humans, he explains, treat time as elastic, stretching it for what excites us, compressing it for what bores us. We often choose instant gratification over long-term reward, even when we know it's harmful. This is the curse of temporal discounting, the tendency to undervalue future outcomes. We smoke, we overspend, we procrastinate, all for the small pleasure of now. The future self pays the debt of the present. But here too, Ariely offers compassion rather than condemnation. He invites us to understand our impulsivity, not despise it. When we see how much we crave the immediate, we can begin to design our lives accordingly to make the right choice easier in the moment it matters most. He gives a beautiful example. People who automatically enrolled in pension plans save far more than those who had to opt in. The difference wasn't willpower, it was design. Small defaults, big impact. When we align our environment with our better intentions, our future becomes lighter, steadier, freer. At the emotional midpoint of Ariely's work, there's a quiet moment, a confession of sorts. He shares his experience after the accident that left him with severe burns. He spent years in hospitals, observing how nurses made decisions about pain, removing bandages quickly or slowly, believing quick was better. But through his experiments, he discovered the opposite. People preferred pain spread out, with pauses for relief. His conclusion wasn't just scientific, it was deeply human. Sometimes, those who care for us still misunderstand what we need, not out of cruelty, but out of misjudged intuition. That realization changed him. It shaped his compassion, his obsession with testing assumptions. It taught him that even good intentions must be guided by evidence, and even evidence must be warmed by empathy. That's what makes Predictably Irrational more than a book of psychology. It's a love letter to human imperfection. You, who are listening right now, have felt that tension too, the moment you wanted to do right, but weren't sure what right looked like. The feeling of making the same mistake again, even when you swore you'd learned. That's what this book embraces. The truth that being human means being predictably flawed, and therefore predictably forgivable. Ariely continues by exploring the cost of keeping doors open. We fear losing options, even when those options harm us. In one experiment modeled as a game, participants were allowed to click on colored doors that led to rewards. They could choose any door, but each click on one door made the others slowly vanish. Most people wasted time jumping between doors, terrified of losing access even though staying on one door yielded more rewards. That's us, isn't it? We keep every door slightly open. The backup plan, the almost relationship, the half-finished dream. We tell ourselves it's about flexibility, but deep down, it's fear of missing out, fear of regret. Yet that fear keeps us trapped in half-living. Ariely's insight is simple and profound. To gain depth, you must accept closure. Letting doors close is not loss, it's focus. The mantra echoes again. We are not as rational as we think, but we can learn to predict and understand our irrationality. From this point forward, Ariely begins connecting these scattered lessons into something larger, a framework for designing a more compassionate society. Behavioral economics, he explains, is not about manipulation, it's about empathy at scale. When we know people forget, we build reminders. When we know people avoid complexity, we simplify systems. When we know pride or fear distort judgment, we create buffers that protect dignity. He gives examples from policy and business. Automatic organ donation systems dramatically increase participation rates when the default is opt-in. Energy usage drops when homes receive bills comparing their consumption to their neighbors. We are social, emotional creatures motivated by belonging more than logic. And so, the most powerful systems don't rely on rationality. They honor our humanity. This is the heart of Ariely's message, that our irrationality, once understood, becomes a blueprint for design for better schools, healthier habits, fairer workplaces, and gentler relationships. The flaw becomes the key. But before the book closes, Ariely takes us one last time into the shadows, into the realm of our deepest biases. He explores how expectations, stereotypes, and context can warp even perception itself. From wine tastings to pain thresholds, from racial bias to consumer behavior, he shows that what we see is rarely what is. Our minds don't passively record reality. They interpret it filtered through layers of story, memory, and assumption. And so he asks, softly, if we are this blind, what does it mean to be human? His answer is not despair, it is humility. To be human is not to be perfect, but to be aware of our imperfections. Awareness, he says, is the most radical kind of intelligence. Humility. That's where Ariely's journey lands, a quiet recognition that the more we learn about our irrational nature, the more tenderly we begin to treat ourselves and others. Because understanding the hidden mechanics of our minds doesn't make us superior, it makes us softer, more forgiving. He begins this final stretch of exploration with the illusion of self-control. You've likely known that feeling. You swear you'll resist the cookie, the scroll, the impulse purchase, and yet, somehow, the will dissolves. Ariely discovered that self-control isn't a stable trait. It's a fleeting state that must be guarded, replenished, and designed for. People who rely solely on willpower often fail. Those who design their lives around it, who pre-commit, simplify, automate, or remove temptation, succeed more often. He illustrates this with the story of Odysseus, tying himself to the mast to resist the siren's call. That's not weakness. Ariely says it's wisdom. It's the recognition that reason alone cannot stand against emotion. So we build walls before the waves arrive. We all need our own ropes, our own masts, a system of compassion disguised as discipline. And then, Ariely explores another subtle but powerful distortion, the problem of price and expectation. In a series of experiments, he found that expensive placebos, or even luxury brand labels, literally change people's physiology. Expensive wine tastes richer, high-priced painkillers soothe more effectively. Branded drinks increase alertness more than identical unbranded ones. Price, it turns out, is not just a number, it's a story we tell our senses. What that reveals is breathtaking. Our beliefs shape our biology. When we think we're receiving more value, our body responds as if we are. Expectation becomes sensation. This isn't deceit, it's proof that our minds are deeply intertwined with perception. Ariely invites us to imagine how we might use that power consciously. What if, instead of outsourcing value to price tags, we trained ourselves to assign it to gratitude, presence, or love? What if worth wasn't what we paid, but what we perceived through awareness? From there, he revisits the theme of ownership, not of things, but of identity. Once we form opinions, we fall in love with them. He ran experiments where participants were asked to argue for one side of an issue and then were asked to switch. Most resisted, not because the argument was flawed, but because once we own a belief, changing it feels like betrayal. That's why debates so rarely change minds. We're not exchanging ideas. We're defending our sense of self. And yet, awareness here can become liberation. If we can hold our beliefs lightly, seeing them as tools, not trophies, we can adapt faster, learn deeper, and love wider. The world doesn't need more certainty. It needs more curiosity. Ariely's work whispers that wisdom is less about knowing and more about noticing. He next explores the strange contradiction between emotion and fairness. We think of ourselves as moral beings, yet fairness often bends under context. In his ultimatum game experiments, when one person was given a sum of money to split with another, recipients often rejected unfair offers even when it meant losing money. Why? Because emotion, not logic, governs fairness. We'd rather punish injustice than benefit from it. It's irrational, yes, but it's also profoundly human. That irrationality, Ariely argues, is what keeps society humane. If we were purely rational, we'd accept exploitation as long as it profited us. But fairness, that gut sense of rightness, is our collective immune system. It makes us rebel against greed and demand dignity. Predictably irrational, yes, but beautifully moral. Then he moves to expectation and experience how our prior beliefs literally sculpt what we feel. In one experiment, beer laced with vinegar tasted better to people who didn't know about the vinegar, but worse to those who did. Knowledge changed experience. This simple truth carries vast implications. It means our lives are shaped less by what happens and more by what we expect will happen. He tells stories of patients whose pain improved when they believed in the treatment, of students who performed better when told they were gifted. Expectations don't just influence outcomes, they become self-fulfilling. If you expect to fail, you gather evidence for failure. If you expect grace, you start seeing it everywhere. Here, the tone turns meditative. Ariely isn't preaching optimism. He's illuminating perception. To change your life, you don't always need to change your circumstances, you need to change your expectations. To believe, not foolishly, but consciously. To see yourself as capable, not perfect, but possible. He transitions gently into the problem of relativity again, that we only understand value in comparison. A person earning $70,000 may feel rich among friends who earn $50,000, but poor among those earning $100,000. We measure ourselves against others instead of our own growth. Ariely calls this one of the deepest irrational traps of modern life, the comparison illusion. In this age of endless social mirrors, his words strike deeper than ever. We scroll, we compare, we diminish our joy by measuring it against filtered versions of others' lives. But Ariely's findings hold hope. Comparison loses power when replaced by reflection. When we compare ourselves not to others, but to who we were yesterday, irrational envy gives way to rational gratitude. And this is where the emotional heart of Predictably Irrational begins to glow. Ariely is interested in making us perfectly logical. He wants to make us compassionately aware. Because the more we understand the hidden levers of our mind, the biases, shortcuts, and emotional echoes, the less we judge others for theirs. Awareness becomes empathy. He weaves in an idea he calls rational irrationality, the understanding that our emotions, though often illogical, serve an evolutionary purpose. Love, trust, fear. They may distort our reasoning, but they also bind us to community, drive creativity, and deepen meaning. Rationality alone could never create art or devotion. Irrationality, in the right measure, is the soul's rebellion against pure logic. And then Ariely draws it all together in one elegant truth. Human beings are designed not for perfection, but for pattern. We are creatures of habit, bias, and belief, and that predictability is our opportunity. Once we know how we fail, we can design systems, personal and societal, that help us succeed despite ourselves. He ends with small, practical transformations. Surround yourself with reminders of your values. They make honesty effortless. Set structures that guide your future self toward your deeper goals. Challenge first impressions and anchors, they are often illusions. Expect good, but verify truth. Choose social over market norms when meaning matters more than money. Let go of extra doors. Focus creates freedom. And perhaps most importantly, forgive yourself for being human. Your irrationality isn't a flaw. It's a fingerprint proof that you feel, that you hope, that you care enough to be moved. As the story closes, Ariely leaves us not with certainty, but with wonder. He reminds us that while we can't escape our biases, we can illuminate them. And in doing so, we become gentler to ourselves, to each other, and to the mysterious, beautiful machinery of being alive. He ends with a quiet metaphor one will leave echoing in your heart. Human nature is like a river. It doesn't flow straight. It bends and curves and sometimes floods. But when we learn its rhythm, its predictable irrationality, we stop fighting the current and start steering with grace. And so, if there's one message to carry from this long and intimate conversation, it is this. Understanding your irrationality is not an admission of weakness. It is an awakening of wisdom. The sunrise comes not when we conquer our flaws, but when we see them clearly and keep walking anyway. If these ideas spoke to something inside you, take a moment, like, share, or comment your reflection. Let this ripple continue. Someone out there needs to hear what you've just felt. Someone still thinks their flaws make them broken. Maybe your words will remind them they're just beautifully, predictably human.